Hi, everyone. Oh,
Hello.
hello. Shannon, I see that we both have our note takers in. Should I kick mine out? Keep
Sure.
yours? Okay.
Yeah, either.
Okay. I don't think we need both. But did I send out the invite? I don't think I can remove it.
I might be able to.
Okay. All right. Hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Good afternoon here in West Virginia.
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry.
And Mark, I think there will be one person on the call who you have not met yet,
Mhm.
because since we were on the last meeting, he is stepping into a different role at Future Generations, and that is Casey, who's on the call.
Yes, I didn't recognize Casey. Hi, Casey.
Hey, Mark.
Nice to connect.
Same to you.
So, Mark, please don't scare Casey off. Casey, Mark has known me and worked with me for about 10 years. So, Casey's going to be working closely with me, Mark, not least on special projects and partnerships. And you have some sense of what that might be like. So, don't scare him off.
Oh, oh my gosh. Okay, let me rework my presentation. No, it's no, nice. That's great. Nice to have more. And everyone, thanks for going to the online format. I enjoyed the last session, but it was a little harder to see and hear some people. So this, yeah, I hope it works for you. It's a lot better for me to hear your comments. So thank you. Yeah. Well, Jane, what I'll let you set it up again. I'm ready. We know what we're chatting about. I can curate the content, but why this? Why us? Why now again?
Okay. So yeah, and are we all here? Uh, just checking. I think so.
Seeing Luke and of course Surindra will watch later.
Okay. Oh yeah, so Luke, is Luke joining? Oh, sorry, Deborah, I didn't hear you.
Getting his plate of food, so he should be
Oh,
logged on momentarily.
okay. All right. Well, Luke will know most of the setup, so I'll get started anyway. So yeah, this really very excited about this strategy process and being in it with all of you and an increasing number of people as we go through the process. So um, it's interesting because when Mark and I were first discussing this potential, even before I joined Future Generations, we were thinking about setting it up as kind of organizational evolution, and it'll be a good time for us to regroup about how we work together, how we're going to move forward through these times and into our next chapter. And of course, at the same time, we terribly need a new strategic plan. And so we decided, well, actually, why would we do that separate from a strategic planning process? And we are distinguishing, by the way, we're trying not to get into this kind of strategic planning that often looks like an action plan where you have things very specifically outlined. We're in the phase of strategy building, which of course is quite expansive and where we will get to things like our priorities and strategic directions. And to get there, we also wanted to start to build our muscles of thinking and working together. Because obviously you all have worked together a lot, but in different ways, and maybe in some of the ways that will be different to how we'll work together now. And as some of you already know, I'm quite a fan of frameworks and of using different frameworks and different ways of seeing and thinking, not to get stuck in, and no model is perfect, no framework is perfect, but I find it very helpful to kind of reframe our thinking and ways that we see things and ways that we can discuss things. And so part of the idea with Mark's joining us, Mark, I'm not sure I know anybody with more expertise in multiple kinds of frameworks than Mark. And so we've been talking about ones that would be well fit for our work in this group. So we're going to go through some more of those today. And one more thing I wanted to share just before we just before I turn it over to Mark, is that as you know, I really want us to build a strategy process that engages everyone and invites everyone in one form or another. And so what we're going to do is expand, because there are some other locally based staff who we're going to invite also to join us on the May 5th and 6th days. And we can talk more about what that will look like, but I feel really good about that. And then we'll also have after sort of the May arc, and we submit some draft outline proposals to the board meeting in June. We'll then go into another phase in July, August, and September, where we'll really flesh things out, and we'll engage some additional people, partners, board members, and so on. So as I said, I'm really excited about this process because it's a chance for us to get to know each other better, to build our collaborative muscles, but also to see and think a little bit differently, and to challenge our assumptions about how things work, and to invite different and creative and innovative ways for us to move forward together into the future. And I think that we have so much to contribute, and so this is a really wonderful opportunity for us to work on that together. So I'm really grateful for it and for your engagement. I think that's quite enough. So unless anyone has something to add or a question, I'll turn it over to Mark. Seeing none, over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Okay, I will grab the screen, everyone. And you, again, like last time, will have access to the PowerPoint. We might change some things during the session, but did everyone get the PowerPoint from 2 weeks ago? I think so. Okay, so same kind of thing. I won't repeat much of what we did before, but I will do kind of a reminder that Jane just shared with us. I don't know how many of you know this George Box quote. I think it's just terrific. It's that all models and frameworks are wrong, but sometimes they're useful. And what that means is there's lots of ways to explain all the things that you do and that we try to do to get to make the world a better place. But frameworks can sometimes make things clearer, and they can highlight certain things, even though no framework can capture all the things that you do and think, and therefore none of them are perfect, and they miss things and they distort things. So the metaphor, I think, is when you look at frameworks, you kind of say, what does the world and my work look like using these lenses? And you shift the lens a little bit and things look a little bit differently. So as we're going through this, just want to encourage you once again, just to treat these as lenses. And after each lens, we'll chat about, to what do you see using this lens, and what parts of this lens might be useful for the strategy work. We're confirming that this is a series of sessions, the second of 2 sessions to develop a 5-year strategic plan, where the emphasis is on looking at lenses, but there's some additional follow-up that Jane's already referred to. And what we'll do today is do a real quick review of what's alive for you after that March 10th session 2 weeks ago, what's emerging. Then we're gonna go into 3 ideas, which I'll describe right away, and then we'll wrap up and surface implications for our next step. And we have 2 hours together. And let's begin with this review of March 10th. I did summarize the March 10th using these 3 diagrams, and hopefully some of you, most of you, are visually oriented, and this triggers some thinking for you. But these were the 3 ideas that we explored last time: that strategic thinking, trying to understand what the highest and best use of your time and focus is for the next year, is really about establishing direction and a committing style of leadership that synthesizes a lot of information and is quite creative and intuitive. And that planning is about taking those broad directions and making them actionable, putting them into steps in a very kind of calculating, analytical, logical way. And that while we need strategic thinking without planning is a dream, planning without strategic thinking is often a nightmare, because we can be actioning lots of things but not be all together on the same page about our strategy. So that was distinction number 1. Number 2 was that when we talk about strategy, that there is a range of different ways that can that can look depending on the level of uncertainty in our environment. And this visual from left to right moves from high levels of certainty to low levels of certainty. And our general discussion last time was that we were probably working, between 2 and 3 on many of the elements of the work. But some of you pointed out quite rightly that different parts of the organization might strategically be in higher or lower levels of uncertainty, depending on the issue. The final thing that we touched on was the degree of organizational evolution or change, all the way from organizations that seek to be sustainable. They sustain their current way of thinking and doing and contributing to change in the world. The model doesn't change, to resilient, where the organization focuses on having some shared DNA or some constant DNA, even though the organization, the form of it might evolve, right? But the DNA stays the same. And then the anti-fragile organization, which says our context has shifted so much that we too should evolve our principles, our beliefs, our orientations, and then that's okay. That's a lot in terms of a summary, but I think we spent enough time on it a couple of weeks ago that, except for Casey, who wasn't part of that, Casey, this is all new for you. We spent 2 hours on it 2 weeks ago. This should be a trigger for you that stimulates some kind of memory. So I guess I'll stop here and then maybe ask Jane for a little bit of assistance on the facilitation for looking around the room, the online room. What is alive for you after this discussion 2 weeks ago? Is there anything left on the beach? I can imagine we had 2 hours of the tide coming in and then the tide went out and something was left on the beach in terms of a thought, a feeling, or a question. So over to you. We don't have to go everyone, but if you want to react to this, that would be nice, just to get us warmed up. Joey, you're off camera. We don't know
Yeah.
each other well enough.
No, I I just added my camera on because I felt like if we were going to enter discussion, it was better.
Oh, great.
Not that I had something in particular to say. I mean, I do have some more thoughts, and I don't know that they are deeper ruminations than what we talked about last time about how far we want to push ourselves beyond resiliency.
Mhm.
Just in the sense that you know, I didn't do my homework in the meantime and look up what an anti-fragile organization is, but it does feel to me that like what brings us together is sort of a sense of mission and a sense of goal and hopes. And we are not something like, like an organic community, like a neighborhood association or something where we will be around each other no matter how radically we rethink doing things, right? We are here because there is work going on here that we want to see continuing, right? And
Mhm.
so I wanted to, I don't know, maybe voice that a little bit and see what other folks thought.
It's good, Joy. Thank you. Throw it open, reactions. Oh, no.
Well,
Go ahead, Deborah. Yeah.
yeah, I think I brought this up 2 weeks
Oh.
ago, but the lens that I have of our organization is that in some ways it already is closer to anti-fragile, because we don't seek to determine what community change looks like in the work that we do, because that comes out of emergence and that's not predictable.
Right.
The mission that we have is adaptable to the situation itself, because we work within, like we use strategies to work within communities, and those strategies aren't static either. Those can evolve, and some of our kind of cornerstone methodologies,
Yep.
there's like multiple iterations of those that evolve and become more complex. So I actually think we are kind of anti-fragile because this organization has gone through a couple different iterations
Yep.
as an entity. And I think even the programs that we have now, those also face, have anti-fragile flexibility.
It'd be kind of good to do a history of the organization through the different chapters of evolution. Deborah, I bet you everyone probably could name their own chapters for as much as they know the organization. That would be terrific. Thank you, Deborah. That's excellent. Other reactions or feelings, just mostly to get into the topic again and allow you to express what might be on your mind so you can get ready for 3 new ideas. I'm not biblical, but I have this urge for 3.
Well, I'll just pick up on, excuse me, I'm eating lunch. So
Go ahead, Luke.
I just want to pick up on what Joey and Deborah were saying as the person who's probably been here the longest on the call. Because I do think it's really important to go back to our roots in that we were a research task force first and foremost. So mission, vision is all informed by, in many ways, you could argue, the evolution or pursuit of that age-old research question, which is what creates sustainable impact and how does it go to scale. And so I do, listening to Deborah, I was saying, yeah, we have evolved because while maybe the vehicle or mechanism for advancing that research question, the question itself and that kind of original research charge that fuels the mission, fuels the vision, I would say it's still very healthy and intact, right? So we've seen a lot of evolution to address that. But, from overall 30 years, that research question has remained at the core of who we are and what we do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's good. Look, I didn't know that actually. Just a note to the note taker and Jane, I would love to see some of that original framing of that research question. It's probably touched on in many of the documents I'm reading, but I'd like a direct line to that just to help me better understand your arc. Thank you, Luke. Any others?
Thank you, Luke. That was super helpful. I like the idea of thinking of the organizational DNA as a question, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do too. I like question framing. I'll also add that one word that isn't in these, but for me, is really resonant and in some ways more than ever, which has to do with regenerative and being a regenerative organization, because in many ways we don't we want to financially sustain ourselves, but there's a whole lot about sustaining that we don't want to sustain, a lot of what's in the present, and it needs to be not only conserved but actually regenerated. Whether it's communities we're working with, lots of ecosystems need forms of regeneration, and I would argue us as an organization. So that's not exclusive of these other things we're talking about. In a way, for me, it's an additional layer, and which I think it would be helpful for us to be intentional about.
Good. Yeah. In fact, one could make the argument that regenerative label should be touched on in that continuum of evolution and change as well. Yeah. Everyone, thank you. We're just warming up here. I thought we had a real good conversation about these ideas a couple of weeks ago. Deborah's already in marketing mode. Take a look at the chat box. Thank you, Deborah. Future regenerative. That's excellent, actually.
Okay, so Deborah's already renaming us. Okay,
Yeah.
you're really jumping into the strategy process. Awesome.
Oh my gosh. We're already in marketing. Okay, let's continue. This is terrific. Can you see the screen move here? I'm now balancing 3 different things here, so I can't see if my screen is moving. Has it moved to 3 new ideas?
No.
No, okay. I knew that was going to happen. One more time. Okay. There we go. This has to be victory. Yes? Yep,
Yes.
okay.
Yes,
it.
now, yeah.
Okay, so everyone, I don't know if you remember seeing Mel Brooks' History of the World. He did this is a sort of an age thing, I think, actually, but he made spoofs on historical moments in world history, and he has one moment where Moses is coming down with 3 big tablets, and he comes to the bottom of the mountain and he said, I have these 15 commandments, and then one of the tablets drops, and he goes, no, I mean 10. I have these 10 commandments that are quite important. So we thought last time we were going to have 4 ideas. And then after a debrief with Jane, somehow we have 6. And I'm making fun, Jane. I thought that was really good to introduce some new ideas. So we were thought this whole call was going to be about the adaptive cycle, but we want to introduce 2 other things. So what that means is we're going to go through these at a fairly high level, and in the follow-up, we'll give you some resources about where you might want to go for more. But let's treat this as sort of appetizers in a restaurant, right? We're going to play a little bit with each of the ideas. We're just going to get your initial signals and we'll move on, and we'll see which ones are sticky for you and which ones might be useful as we proceed. So the 3 ideas are the adaptive cycle of organizations, tensions in organizational efforts, and 3 horizon: seeing, thinking, and action. Idea number 4 in that list is something similar to what you have seen a couple of weeks ago. Now, Jane, can you just remind the group, because not everyone was probably in those chats, that you have already talked about this Berkana 2-loop model. Here's a version of it. Just put this in context as what we're about to see is similar but slightly different.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. With most of you, I did share this. I think it was before our last meeting with Mark, again, just in the interest of introducing frameworks and different ways, different lenses for us to use. So one of the reasons that I like this a lot is these 2 loops, if you will. On the left, this arc and then an upward facing kind of scoop represent, on the one hand, the world as it is and how many parts of the world as it is are dying. And some people are actually helping to hospice old systems, and then others are fighting against that big time. And as this is happening, there is this loop that is growing, which is where all kinds of beautiful things are happening. And we work with so many students and alumni and communities where we can see like these circles, these communities of practice, these communities of change are bubbling up, and they're illuminating, they're creating systems of influence. These are new worlds that are being born, where we see very different kinds of futures emerging and possibilities that could be continually seeded and scaled in order to grow into the emerging worlds that our hearts know are possible. And so that is that upper loop. And then in moving from, of course, in the loop of the world as it is, there's so much composting that needs to happen, and that compost actually feeds the worlds that are coming into being. And then the one line across drawn between the 2 is transition. And in many ways, the transition can be the hardest part because it's one thing to be in the world as it is, and and then we can also spend parts of our lives kind of, because we have to operate in those worlds, and at the same time we're working on worlds that are coming into being, but actually transitioning from one to the other, especially when the context is increasingly dark, is very difficult. So what that transition looks like, I think, is a huge part of also what we need to tend to. And I think naming that and what that means is really important. Is that enough, Mark?
It is, and we'll just know that what we're doing here is we gave you a real quick review of this because some of you may have locked in on this, and we might well return to this. We want to share a slightly complementary framework that others have also found useful as a lens. So I'm going to say, let's not react to this piece yet because we really want you to react to the next one, but we may well return to this as we proceed moving forward. But it does normalize that lots of things are happening at different times and that they all need to happen, and you have to be aware of it. So I'm going to start with this slide. And I live in a part of Canada where this is happening a lot right now. You may have seen some of our smoke. A forest fire, good, bad, or good and bad? This is a question to the group. Of course, it's a slow, easy one. Go ahead, Joey.
Depends on the fire.
There you go. Tell me more about it. Tell us more about it. Depends.
Yeah, right. So, I just was watching a forest fire in Botetourt County, Virginia the other day. Went to visit some friends in Roanoke, and there was a big plume and it was an unintended fire, and it was taking out trees that would have survived a lower heat fire on the west side of the mountain. On the east side, to stop that from spreading over the ridge and into the neighborhoods and down into Roanoke, they had another fire. They did a prescribed burn, right? And they did that intentionally. They did it well. It saved the neighborhood, yada yada. And this was a small fire that probably didn't even make the news. But yeah, I mean, without fire, all sorts of pine cones won't open, right? There's just a need for fire for understory canopy crops, but it just really depends on the landscape, the scale of the fire, how the forest has been maintained. I mean, hundreds of factors.
Well, and to jump on that, Joey,
Oh,
I agree, you know, you're the expert, but I know this as well, but where I used to work was very affected by the Gatlinburg wildfires. um, and so there's, I think, a difference between forest fire, which is more of a neutral term, and wildfire, which is a negative term.
Interesting.
yeah, and I think I mean, as 'cause fires are getting scarier as climate changes because they're showing up in places where people haven't built for them, but people still aren't building for them even in places where they've happened for generations. So, so they're getting scarier even as they're more and more needed because those prescribed burns are what keeps us safe, right?
Well, this is already the best response I've ever had to this question, so this is terrific. Uh, I think you get the metaphor, everyone. I'm going to just keep playing it. Thank you, Joy and Deborah, for getting us going on it. It really is, the answer is it depends. And it also invites us to play with an ecological metaphor a little bit and bring it into human systems. So this act, using Buzz Holling's framing of this, of a forest fire, is called creative destruction, although there is something called catastrophic destruction, which we're going to talk about right away. Creative destruction is where the fire itself burns in a way that is a preparation for renewal. But that means that the forest is burnt, but the nutrients required for renewal and the heat that induces the release of seeds from pine cones, etc., creates the conditions for renewal. And this is really a preparatory phase for that. So you talk about prescribed burns. That's part of the stewardship process of creating fires if it's not happening natural, prescribed burns. And the renewal process actually creates the space for something called exploitation. And I know this doesn't really work well in our world, this phrase, because it's got a lot of connotations, but in ecological terms, exploitation, and Joy, I realize I might be spilling into your business here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong on some of this stuff, is where the more dominant species and relationships begin to sort of shape the ecosystem. Right? There's all these new resources created for and relationships and species, all different kinds of species, that they begin to shape the arc of the trajectory of the regrowth of the forest, which eventually goes into the conservation mode. And the conservation mode of a forest is the forest itself is very efficient, highly efficient, much fewer species, but is also quite rigid. Or can become rigid and not overly adaptive. And the longer that goes on, the more likely things are going to tip into creative destruction. Now, I had a weeping birch tree. I don't know if you have weeping birch in West Virginia. Do you? You probably have way more trees than we do. But weeping birch trees are really water hungry. And when my city was developed in the 50s, we had quite a lot of rainfall. And a lot of the city really grew, and a lot of people had weeping birch. The problem with weeping birch is near the end of their life, they become extraordinarily thirsty. And if they don't get the water they need, they begin to cannibalize the environment around them to get that water. So the roof, the tree line, the tree top begins to the leaves fall off. The lower branches are robust, but the grass and the soil around it turns kind of sclerotic in a way because it's sucking up all the water. And so in some ways it extends its lifespan by doing that. At the same time, it accelerates it because it's wrecking its ecosystem just to stay alive. Now, when we don't have prescribed burns or things don't happen on time, and we extend the life cycle of a tree, of a forest like that, like we did for our tree, something called catastrophic destruction can happen. And catastrophic destruction, unlike creative destruction, and Joey and Deborah, you were sort of getting at this idea in your comments, is where the destructive process is so big that it destroys the nutrients required for renewal. So if you go to certain places in California, I've driven by, the places haven't really recovered from forest fire. The viscosity of the soil is gone, right? And it's just you have can't maintain rain, and so the conditions for renewal are gone. So we don't want catastrophic destruction. Now, this is a metaphor for human systems, and I want to go to that in the next slide, but I want to stop here just to see if using this metaphor is useful. Joey and Deborah, you started us off with this thing. This, you might have more to say about this. Does this kind of metaphor make sense to you about the importance of the evolution of a forest? And we're going to apply it into human systems here right away. I happen to love this. I think it's elegant and simple. It raises lots of interesting questions and some tensions as well. But does this feel coherent to you? Does this feel right to understand the ecocycle of a forest in this way?
Yes.
Yeah, Jenny's got her thumbs up.
We're getting a bunch of thumbs up.
I
And
think it depends. I think it's that point. You've got a lot of people who know a lot about forestry on this call. I'm starting to say, well, it depends on if it's old growth or second growth forest. It depends on how it's being managed. Like there are a lot of variables. So I think I think at the meta level, I see the point. But obviously, given that we have whole coaching programs and this sort of thing, I'm like, well, actually, a forest fire on our second growth forest outside our window would be terrible, right? Like, regardless of controlled or not.
Yeah. I agree with you. Mostly, all these things are, it depends. The answer to them, is it good or bad? I know that we experienced not long ago in Western Canada a fire at a beautiful national park called Jasper. Some of you may have heard Banff National Park and Lake Louise, etc. But north of that is a beautiful national park called Jasper. And for the last 15 years, have been going there and saying, we better enjoy this. And my wife confirmed this the other day. She said, you said that every year, that the red pine beetle, which is explosive and all over the place in our parts of Canada because of climate change, and now they can come into the north like this, they have essentially wrecked the forest. They've been eating away those branches, and so eating away at the forest, and so it has been dry and brittle. And it was so obvious right by this national resort that we were going to have a fire, and we did have a fire, and half the town is gone completely, as well as part of the resort. And so Leanne has pictures of this, and the question is, when I look at this, I go, well, how destructive was that fire? Was it creative, or at one point was it catastrophic? Because the forest clearly needed to evolve. We just didn't want it to do it, right? Why? Because it's a national park and we like the beautiful views and the lake and the cottages, etc. So this is really descriptive. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. But I am going to confirm what it means for us, or propose to you a couple of ideas, and that is that when we get trained, the way we get trained, the way we think, the way we get funded, the way we do stewardship, etc., is highly calibrated to what we would call the S loop, the forward loop. Develop something, grow it, sustain it, and manage it in maturity, and keep working on it. We actually don't spend as much time working on or thinking about or supporting the backward loop, the act of release and creative destruction and renewal. And it doesn't mean we don't do it. Everyone knows about it, but it is sort of like, well, let's just hurry up and get through that because we want to hurry up and get back to the S loop. So I'm going to give you a little example of how this has been applied, calling it either the adaptive cycle, the panarchy cycle, the eco cycle, the infinity loop. There's lots of names for this. And I'm going to change the language just a little bit. And this is some of my changes, not others. You could call it whatever you like. But I know that I changed the phrase from release to release from creative destruction when I did this with a Catholic organization. And one of the participants, she was a nun, she was a senior nun, and she said, I don't like that word. Could you call it release, blessed release? And it was a pretty good phrase because a release means releasing old ways of thinking, old relationships, and old patterns. Something has to be released in order for new things to emerge. And I want to get into that now. This is an example that I bet you almost everyone on the staff team could describe in a different way. I'm going to describe it in a truncated way. This is about peer lending, Mohammed Yunus, and micro lending. So many of you, I'm sure, given your work, you know lots about this, but the peer lending program that got developed in the 70s is actually a great illustration of the adaptive Lucan process. Mohammed Yunus was a professor of economics in Bangladesh. I forgot what university, and he did a lot of work on macroeconomic policy and poverty reduction, and then admitted in his book that one day he didn't want to go to his own lectures anymore. And he goes, I think what we've done is we've done as much as we can with macroeconomic policies, and there has been some progress in reducing poverty in Bangladesh, but it's not generating the results that it used to result. And therefore, I think we need to take a new look at things. And I can't see it from I can't see it from where I'm sitting. So what he did is he went on a kind of a sabbatical, I think it was, I don't actually remember the details of that, but he took off with some grad students and he went and said, I want to go get a worm's eye view, not a bird's eye view of what it's like to experience poverty and those systems in Bangladesh. So he started taking off and doing work in the villages. And as he was relieving his old position and perspectives to do that, he started doing a lot of little experiments in the field. He was watching the systems of agriculture and many other things, and started tinkering around with many ideas, including different kinds of social enterprises. He did a whole bunch of stuff around agricultural reform, little projects like co-ops, etc. And a lot of them didn't work out, but he said it was really completely learning rich, and he was failing forward with these small experiments. There was one day coming back from one of these experiments that he stopped by a village, and I used to know her name. Oh my goodness, it's been a while since I used this story. Satya. He met a woman who was building baskets, and he asked her what she was doing. She said she was building baskets. He was curious about the mechanics of this, and he said, how much do you make doing it? And she gave him a number that was quite small. And he says, boy, that's a lot of work for the profit, the surplus that you get from that. Is there any way that we could increase the profit? And she said, well, one of the things that would help is getting access to money because I have to go to predatory lenders. And they charge an extraordinarily high interest rate. And if it was something like was offered at a bank, here's how my profit would increase. And so he heard that story. He asked his grad student to give her a loan to buy the material, sort of a working capital loan, and that she could pay him back when she wanted. And he also said to his student, go out into this village or in the surrounding area and find out how many other people are also in a similar situation dealing with predatory financing. So, or with high interest rates. So they did it, and I forgot the number. It's kind of like 40 people, not all making baskets, doing different things. So what he started doing is just providing them working capital, and the sums at that time were quite low. And he learned a bunch of stuff. And after a year or two of doing this, he generated insights into the nature of the challenge that he was trying to address, which was poverty. And so he found something that looks elegantly simple here, but I'm sure was a little bit more messy in practice, that the characteristics of people living in poverty were that they required small amounts of loans, that but banking systems provided only large loans because you like large loans because of the transaction costs, right? Why give 100 loans for $10 when you could give one loan for 10,000 or 1,000? That the people living in poverty couldn't read or write, and major banks have multiple forms and applications. People didn't have assets, but you required collateral. It was mostly women who were looking for additional access to capital. There was a cultural bias, which still exists actually in much of the world, and certainly existed in the 70s and 80s when I do research about what happened in Canada. Banks prefer to lend to men. Historically, that's the pattern. And finally, the perception that people could not afford to pay loans. And I should say that was a perception. And in fact, the perception of them as poor risk, but in some ways in rural communities, having your word and demonstrating your word is the highest form of social capital. And therefore they cannot not afford to pay a loan. You can't lose yourself like you would be in the city. So at one point he Mohammed comes up and says, you know what, I'm going to move from these personal loans and I'm actually going to go to a bank, a post-secondary not a post-secondary banking institution in Jabra. And I say, I will guarantee the loans if you provide those loans. And he ran up against the same banking patterns. They wouldn't do it. The case for why was clear, but the systemic barriers were so much that the jobber group said, we're not going to do it. So he created his own peer lending process. And I'm not going to go over to this in detail, but you know the story. People guarantee each other loans. They meet weekly to talk about their projects and to pay their loans back in small amounts. And this combination of ingenuity around the process, plus the social capital of people in the villages, particularly women in this case, created a really high repayment rate. So that model got developed over several iterations to the point where it got scaled up into 65 programs in 27 countries and became one of the most successful anti-poverty reduction projects in the world. At one point, though, the curve moved and there was a decline in, for a bunch of reasons, decline in number of boroughs, decline in repayment rates, and a whole bunch of things happened. And it was clear that it hit the ceiling. Was it competition from other micro lenders? Did they saturate the market? Were there problems in the loan model itself that didn't emerge? We don't know. So long story short, this story continues on. I'm not going to track the rest of the adaptive cycle, but one of the things that Mohammed Yunus did later is he went back to social enterprise work and has started a strategy that almost mimics this entire adaptive cycle yet again. So the idea here is that human interventions, institutions, and programs often go through the same kind of process. And I'll go through this quickly. We birth something. It gets developed and adapted and then refined over time through multiple iterations. And this zone is very entrepreneurial, adaptive, not efficient at all because you're trying to make something work. You're trying to make it effective, not efficient yet. It's flexible, it's full of trial and error, dead ends, lots of variation in how to do things, lag times between activities and outcomes, flexibility. And there is a tolerance for risk because the mission is to find something that's effective. As we get through that phase, people often want to go to the top right phase, this search for high predictable performance, which is much more about, well, we know it's effective, let's make it efficient. And we like certainty and stability and hierarchy, standardization, etc. We have big manuals about how to do stuff. This is recipe country. And if you follow the recipe with high fidelity, you should get predictable high performance. For a while, you manage it and conserve it, but then this happens. I'm going to show it again because this took me a lot to figure out how to do on PowerPoint. You begin to see a decline in performance. And what happens then is all these remedial instincts kick in, and it is things like, you know what, the model we have is fine, let's just work harder. Right? Or the model is fine, let's work harder and maybe make some tweaks, but the model's still good. Or the model is fine, we've done some tweaks, but what we need is more resources. Right? That's the third one. The final one is the model is fine, maybe not be fine because we've got new resources. It seems roughly right what we're doing, but maybe we're asking the model to do stuff that it was never designed to do in the first place, or the context has shifted on us so much that we need a new model. And then what we're doing is saying we have to stop with decline. That creates a disruptive act. This should be disruption over here, which creates the release. Sometimes this is internally driven restructuring. Sometimes it's imposed by the context. We're going through lots of acts of creative destruction right now, everybody. Right? Whether you like them or not, we're clearly in this zone. And what does that bottom space look like? It is about unraveling. It's chaos, loss, anger, blame, conflict, angst, little structure or process, heavy reflection, lean on relationships and values, in the hope that we can go through the process of transition you were referring to earlier, Jane, and grieving to create an itch to proceed forward. Now, this is very difficult to get through this phase, and we want to do it at 1,000,000 miles an hour half the time, but you can't. You actually have to go through this because if you don't, then we don't create realistic conditions for something new to emerge. New engagement, new ideas, new partners, new possibilities, expanding possibilities and buy-in through trying different things that may or may not work, and eventually deciding where you want to place big bets on things that you would like to proceed with going forward. This is all about generating insights and empathy and options this phase, and it is unavoidably creative, messy, full of diverse perspectives, conversations, research, probes, and prototypes, hunches, and emergence. Why? Because we want to get to the place where it helps us to make a big bet. Now, I'll stop there for a second. I have a couple more slides on this before we chat. But any reactions to this? We're taking an ecological metaphor about forests, which you know quite well, and we're gently trying to say, what if we use that same lens to think about organizations? And I'll put this up at multiple levels. We did this with the school board. You can imagine a classroom experiencing the ecocycle. Maybe you have a really quite veteran teacher teaching something in a classroom, or a very new teacher where we're in the emergent phase, all the way to an education system that might be quite disruptive, or it might be quite steady and sclerotic. And so this dynamic experience is experienced across phases. And sometimes you have change from the bottom, where the bottom is moving faster than the big systems. And sometimes the big systems get disrupted, which create ripple effects on the smaller systems that are quite chaotic. So these dynamics range over time, but we do know that at multiple levels, we think that this generates some insights about the kind of dynamics systems exhibit at different phases of their evolution and development. So that's a lot. I do want to say one or two more things, but I'm going to stop here for people to react. How do you feel about looking through your work, never mind most of society and programs, through this lens? Is it revealing? Does it show you something, or does it feel confusing? I'm going to change my... I will mention again that I like this one so much, I question my own judgment. When I first saw this, I went, boy, does this ever help with some things? Who feels awkward with this thing? Does anyone feel like, boy, this is a little bit too heady and I can't really see much insight about our own organization, never mind others emerging from this?
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, I'm a big believer in, according to Seed Scale, we like to accent the role of iterative growth. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm really kind of seeing the iterative growth cycle playing out, right? Try some things, repeat what worked, don't repeat what didn't, as I try to kind of layer it onto a management scheme, as it were.
Yep. Yeah, and Luke, so would you say the bottom left is kind of unavoidably iterative growth? Try stuff, see what works, what doesn't, reinforce success, and just see where it goes?
I mean, I would say I wouldn't put it just to the bottom left. I would say, to my mind, when I teach the topic of making iterative decisions based on evidence and kind of as Seed Scale pulls them all together, I would kind of argue in many ways this whole cycle
Yep.
is the iterative one, because as you say, sometimes people want things to move faster, sometimes they don't. I think, to my mind, what is the key, what I take from that and what I always tell the students is, when you're doing iteration, it's important to focus on what's working, not the things that you're gonna innovate out of. Kind of stopping and analyzing why things you just are accepting, kind of, to use your forest model,
Yep.
that you're going, the iteration is supposed to inform what's working. It's really not a process of stopping and analyzing what's not.
Interesting. That's awesome. Thanks for getting us going, Luke. Other reactions to this?
I'm going to share something in the chat, and it's a graphic I've seen.
Okay, thanks, Deborah.
Um,
I think we're often in the development and release cycles, and our partner organizations are in the maturity and exploration phases. Yeah, that's a very good insight. Sometimes you're in two different orientations and modes. Someone's going, look, I'm trying to here to make high efficient, productive impact, and you're going, well, I'm just trying to figure out what the heck's working. And may or may not work. I don't want to scale yet. I don't want to shoot for efficiency.
Can I just ask for Jenny, would you say more to your comment there?
Yeah, I think often, and I mean, some of it is we sit in a place where we can be in those cycles. Whereas like our partners at traditional universities have to, they're stuck in maturity phase, right? They're stuck in like, we do what, like, we do the thing we're required to do. Like the curriculum says we have to do it this way, so we're doing it this way. And then like when it falls apart, we catch them and kind of accompany them through some of that rebuilding and then kind of turn them loose again and then catch them again on the other side. And so it's almost like we're like the ones that are forcing things to keep going, kind of in this iterative process, which is really cool. I like to be in that, like, I like that we sit in that role. But like listening to Mark talk, it occurred to me that like we are often I won't say we like pick up the pieces, but we're often the encourager to get to the next step and to kind of accompany people through like, yeah, this didn't work anymore. Now what? Right?
Mhm.
When we're going to be alongside you as you figure out now what. And then once we figure out now what, it's all right, go try it and let us know. And then we're going to be alongside you as we start to adapt it and get it back into this formulaic thing that they like to do.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's good.
Can I jump in on that?
Of course, Jane.
Yeah, Jenny, I love that, and that's really helpful way to see. I wonder if also, and maybe this is also for you first, Jenny, if so that's in a way looking at us as an institution in relation to partner institutions. How about us internally? If you sort of flip that and think about just us, not in relation to our external partners, but us internally, how do you then see it?
I can like sort of pinpoint different things that we're doing and stick them in different spots. So like I feel like, we've at least in like my in my lifetime at in the Appalachia team, I think we've done a lot of this development and we've gotten to maturity with some stuff and now we're like I feel like and this is by no means a criticism of Appalachia, it's just the natural like life cycle of things. I think we've got a number of things that were maybe created during COVID that are now going through this like release phase and we're kind of fighting it. Like we really are kind of fighting it. It's like it may be time to give up some of the stuff that like we've just been doing and doing and doing. To kind of figure out what the next step looks like. And I think the university curriculum wise may sort of not necessarily be it because the curriculum has not been standard from the get-go, I feel like, but it might be time to like look at what it it looks like and see where in the phase we are and figure out what that next logical step is. Because I feel like every time scale gets taught, and I mean we all know this, we can kind of chuckle at it, but every time scale gets taught, it's almost like it never gets to maturity. It's just in development all the time. Whereas I think like seed is sort of on the front side of maturity. Like it's standard, it's there, and we just need to like ride that out for a little bit. So I think that different parts are a different thing, right? Those are my two. Appalachian academics are the two things I work with all the time. So
Well, let me jump in on that, Jenny, because I think, I mean, and I want to go to Jane's question too, because I do think, one question I get a lot, and I know Chris gets it or Kelly gets it, is this question of synergy across community engagement and academics. And I do think, as you say, Jenny, on the community engagement side, we spend a lot of time exploring and developing and then kind of trying to grow it to maturity, right? Like from the whole idea of doing research that then would say, so I'm thinking about the cycle of a student, kind of coming in, growing, maturing, going out into the world as an alumni, and then maybe kind of coming back to us in the community engagement division saying, hey, I've released, look at the cool things I'm doing with your degree. I now have insight or actions research where they kind of re-engage as often when we talk about that lifelong learning for alumni, it does kind of follow this general path as we talk about having the divisions mutually inform one another.
An observation, I don't have, we could do the exercise eventually, people like it, but Jenny, you just did, and Luke added in real time. a thing called ecocycle mapping. And it's where you take things and you go, where are we now on the ecocycle? And Jenny, let's pretend you and I were doing it. It'd be Jenny, let's say you're taking volunteer recruitment, right? That's your thing, you're sticky. And I go, where would you put it? I know it's not what you do, but right. Or no, curriculum. One of the curriculums, I would say, where would you put it? And you put it somewhere in the ecocycle, and then the rest, and you say why. And then the rest of the team, like Luke and others, would say, oh, I don't know, I would put it lower or higher or somewhere else. And you listen to everybody, and it's generative, right? Deborah, you might make some good points about it too. And so, Jenny, you're listening. You say, thank you, everyone. Given this, I'm going to move it from here to there because I think that's a better place. And then we go to the next thing. We say, Deborah, what's your sticky? And you say, I'm talking about this. And what you do is you create an existing map in a way that tries to get everyone on the same page, but also surfaces where we may not be on the same page. And then the thing is, given where we think we want to go, and that is not an easy thing, but assuming we do know, we'd say, where do we want to be in 3 years? And Jenny, you might say, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like curriculum to be over here. I think we need to do a bit more of this. And we have a debate about that. And you'd say, here's our baseline, and here's where on all our major activities or things that are important to us, given this general direction, is where we want to go, which includes letting go of some things, adding some things, saying, I don't think we'll get a new model there. I think we're going to be in development for quite a while, but in 3 years, I think we could make midway through development. And it's just a guided exploration of where are we now and where do we think we want to go in a way that generates insights and learnings and is a little bit generative. Yeah, so you just did it in real time. That's an exercise. Okay, I think let's see if we have any other quick examples or reactions to this before I add a curl or two. Shannon, Chris, Joey, I can see you on my screen. Anything to share?
I was gonna do more of that mapping, but I'll wait till you add a curl or two and then
Yeah. Well, I think we should. If we had this whole session, I was going to do a little bit of a mapping exercise. It's a dead easy exercise to do. There's lots written on it, so it's quite fun. People love doing it. Okay, I'll add. Well, let's just see. Chris, Shannon, Joey might weigh in at the end of this. Anyone else want to contribute? I feel like playing a video game.
Casey, Stephanie also are there.
Okay, Jane, why don't we do this? Because I'm literally too old to look and present. So if you tell me who wants, oh, Chris, I see Chris is on.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to like to think about things a long time before I speak, but I'm working mostly in the academic program. And I feel like we are still down in the development stage, trying to get to a growth stage. And I don't, I don't even know what a mature stage would look like for us. Like I feel like we're in development, and I know for a lot of times we've been in development, we've kind of cycled back in development, and never really gotten very far along the growth, because we in the past have constantly changed things. So I feel like maybe now we're starting to do something like we've sort of found something that seems to work, and we can start moving up that growth path toward maturity. But I don't know. That's sort of how I feel at the moment, and I don't know if others would agree with that or not.
no, I
Chris,
want
I'm
to
go
just
ahead, Joey.
second that. Yeah, Chris, I don't feel like we've made it to maturity anywhere in the university yet.
Okay, I'm just going to throw this out because you both sort
Sorry,
of referenced it. Is it sometimes, and I don't have a good answer to this, there might be situations, and I'm not saying yours is it, where things never get to maturity because things are evolving so quickly, you don't have the stability required to get to maturity because you're constantly adapting to a fast-moving context. I don't know if that's your situation, because there's a moment where you might look at this and go, damn, how come we're never in the top right? And I want to be, versus maybe it wasn't appropriate for us to be in the top right for the following reasons. And I don't have an opinion. I'm just sharing that. How do you know? I mean, it's a good question. Should you be in the top right? And when do you say, well, it would be nice if we could, but the conditions don't exist for that. Sorry, Jane, go ahead.
Well, one thing is, Shannon, you came off mute. I don't know if that's the same as a raised hand. Did you want to say something?
Well, I'm listening and contemplating, but and I'm trying to think about this from like a holistic strategy for the entire organization. Because when we start talking about like program specific growth, like it's been said, we can hit all of these stages at the same time. I mean, my initial reaction thinking about today and what's going on, like I feel more in exploration phase right now, but agree that over the 3 decades of lots of change in organizations, I agree. I don't know what maturity would look like because but then, maybe that's something that you're just constantly striving for, maturity. But yeah, that's my initial thought.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Thanks, Shannon. And I will also jump in because, I hear all of these things and resonate and I identify with. Obviously, I'm the newest person to the institution. What I also see is that, we have been a university and we're a social enterprise and nonprofit long before we were a university, but even have been a university 22, 23 years and using some of the same language, using some of the same framework. So for me, it feels like sometimes we're stuck in parts of our maturity at the same time. So yeah, I can see parts all along, and part of it again is just how you're seeing it from what vantage, um, and then also wanted to make the note, as I said in my listening sessions, this notion of perceived resourcing, it's really interesting, feeling always in scarcity. I have worked for many organizations that were in far more difficulty financially, even than we are, where there was less a sense of constant scarcity. And then what does that open up if you sort of change how you look at it? It doesn't mean that we're not frugal. It doesn't mean that we don't have to be very, very careful and that we don't have some precarity. But at the same time, it does, if we constantly take ourselves to that and put ourselves in that mode, it really stifles creativity in my view. So just a thought.
Deborah is also weighing in. Thank you, Deborah. Do you want to voice those, Deborah? Or would you prefer we just read them?
I just didn't want to take up more speaking time now to move forward, but I wanted to get my thought out.
Yeah, you know what, Brett, thank you. You're such a good group. Deborah, your second point in particular, there's another exercise that people do, which is where's your preferred state? So and that's quite good. And I've actually done mapping with staff and boards where we make a big eco-cycle on the ground and we go to the place where you feel strongest and go to the place where you feel, doesn't mean you can't do it, but where you go, I can do it, but it takes enormous amounts of energy for me. So Deborah, if you don't mind, where's your preferred place on the eco-cycle? Where do you feel strongest and most energized?
It's not the release.
Not the release?
That's where I feel like I am, like existentially right now. For me, I think I love, I like the refining, like adapting, refining. So like kind of the into development into the growth part. And because I love ideas and I love trying things and seeing, like forming things from ideas to visual or actual.
Yeah. And so this is good. So the exercise is you reveal that, right? And then you'd say it doesn't mean you can't do the other stuff. It just means you don't get as charged and energized, and it probably takes you more calories to do that than your preferred state, right? And so what you do is you kind of just acknowledge we need all of this. A good organization has people doing different things with different temperaments. That's literally the reason we have teams and organizations. And it's just people have preferred styles, and to know, for example, that we're going, okay, we're doing this. Deborah's going to have to hold on because We got some creative stuff, but her time will come when we get to the refinement work, right? That kind of thing. So that's terrific. Thank you. Jane, if you can't see anyone, I want to go to the next thing.
Yep, I see no raised hands.
Okay. So I'm going to give you one more thing. I have more on this, but getting from phase to phase, every phase is sort of its own little emotional country, right? And kind of action country, but it is not always that easy to get from phase to phase. There's these traps that exist. So here is trap number one. We are in maturity. We know that we probably should go through some kind of release and renewal, but we're stuck in a rigidity trap, stuck in old patterns. We're either too big to change. We are too committed to an old model. We like it. The old model pays bills in a predictable way, and therefore we're committed to it, right? There's a whole bunch of, we have vested interests and authority and legitimacy in the old model. There's a lot of reasons we hold on to models, all legitimate. But it's tough to get through those. And so either you muster the will to do it internally, or sometimes it's imposed upon you and you're going through it anyways. Number two is, let's say after we go through release and we want to move forward to renewal, there's something called the chronic disaster trap. And the chronic disaster trap is we actually let go, but we can't seem to get traction moving forward. People come and go. We're putting out forest fires. There's some people who haven't really given up on the old model and continue to want to kind of go backwards and go to the top right because they liked that and it was good, but so they haven't really released. And there's lots of reasons that we never seem to get out, right? Ideas pop up and they go away. They pop up and they go away. Often people are coming and going too in this stage. The third kind of trap is the scarcity trap. And the scarcity trap is we've got a lot of new ideas about things that we want to do, but there's not enough resources or commitment to move forward on them. Why? Because we've got too many ideas. And just like, for those of you who have gardens and you prune carrots, because not all carrots can grow after you plant the seeds, you got to make choices. Not you can't necessarily do 10 new innovative things. I don't know what the number is. Maybe you can do 4 of them or something like that because you have that much time or attention. Or maybe it's because we went through the backward loop and we didn't really do renewal work. We went through the backward loop at 1,000 miles per hour. And therefore, the new stuff isn't all that interesting and it's hard to commit to them. You go, really? Is that our new idea? Right? So you don't have the emotional energy to do it. So there's lots of reasons that people actually can't commit to doing something in the new phase. Let's pretend we go through the development phase, everyone. We've developed and refined some things, and we would like to get to growth and maturity, but somehow we can't. And this is sometimes called the parasitic trap. And the parasitic trap is it's often dependent on the birthing conditions. And the idea there is maybe there was a time and space where everyone was pumped on that idea, but that context has changed. Everyone was into just transition. Someone was just telling that the other day. Someone said, whatever happened to that phrase? It's kind of gone now. But there was a time and place where that was big. It was dependent on a particular personality, right? Chris was really good at that, and Chris is no longer here or interested in that. But if Chris doesn't want to do it, we were really dependent on Chris. It was a personality. It could be on a particular kind of resources. It could be on a lot of things. It could be about this model worked really good when it was flexible, but and it's dependent on it being flexible. And the moment we try and codify it and scale it, it falls apart. So there's lots of reasons that we don't get to the parasitic trap. Now here's the upside. Traps, if you do plumbing, exist for a reason. Not everything is made to get through these traps. Sometimes the rigidity is we're not really ready to go through a renewal. We need to start expanding the options so we're more comfortable in letting go. We have to deal with people's grief, etc. And so we're not ready to get through rigidity. Sometimes we can't get through the chronic disaster trap in a day. You actually have to, we're dealing with a lot of people right now in NGOs. You grieve for a while. And I'm not good at that. I'm a repressed East European immigrant. I repress all my feelings, but I know it's inappropriate because you do actually have to do work in the bottom right. Not all good ideas are meant to go forward. That's why we don't get through the scarcity trap. And some things were never designed to scale. and to grow. And that's why I said that earlier. I'm not making a pronouncement on it, but sometimes they're not. So what these traps are in some ways are kind of like a discipline reminder. Pay attention to this process and take it seriously, because our job is to improve the probabilities that we make it through traps, knowing that they're not made to get through easily. That's just life. So I'll stop here for a second just to see if you have reactions to this, because I do want to talk about two other ideas, and I think we have times, but the traps adds a little bit of an extra texture to this, doesn't it? Right? It just says, sure, the phases are one thing, but it's a little bit of a work to get to each phase. You just don't pass go and collect $200. You got to do some work. Jane, you've never seen this, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think I have seen
Or this
the
iteration.
traps. Yeah, no, it's good. And I like this edition a lot. And I see no hands, so feel free to keep going.
Okay.
Well, I was sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Chris.
Well,
great.
Joey actually did the right thing by putting his hand up. I actually raised my physical hand. You go ahead, Joey.
All I was gonna do is just add a layer to what I had mentioned earlier, right? Which I had promised to do, so now I better deliver, right?
Good. Good.
When I'd mentioned that I don't really see much of what we're doing going up into the growth and maturity cycle. I don't think that's because we're getting caught in traps. It feels to me like that's actually, like when I look at like where everybody is in the organization and where we want to place ourselves, asking that question Deborah was asking. I don't think a lot of us really want to do that, right? A lot of us, I don't think, are here at this institution because we're really interested in managing stable organizations over the long term. And I don't know that that's a huge problem. I think that's, we're here doing strategic thinking, not planning, so that's not for me to say, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's a failure or falling into a trap on our part. I think that's just where we keep our energy.
Boy, Joy, that's why I love this exercise. Literally, because someone says, where are we? And then you have to say, talk about the reasons for it and make a case for it and make it get real with it. And you just did. That's a real decent argument. And it's good. We all learn something when an observation like that is made. So this kind of discussion forces us to make assessments that can prompt other people to react, say they agree or they don't agree. So I think that's just an excellent input. Thank you. Chris, did you want to riff on that? Did you have another angle on it?
Well, sort of. I was maybe this is more rhetorical, but if how do you know that you're stuck in a trap? I mean, I don't know if we can ever answer that, but how do you know if you're stuck in a trap or you have actually a good idea or a good plan and you just need to keep pushing through? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't, when you can't see the forest for the trees, how do you, like, just how do you know? I don't know. That's just a
Yeah.
retort. I don't know that I necessarily need an answer, or it's just something that I was thinking about. It's like, well, how wouldn't necessarily know.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm kind of excited by this last round of chatter. That's why I like this exercise. You could say, well, I have a hunch, like reveal it, and then go, oh God, I don't know if I believe what I just said, but I wanted to say something. No, I think that's the way this goes. And you start saying, well, I think we've been trying to scale that curriculum for 20 years. And we'll say, no, I don't think we have. And then you just start debating it. And you started kind of, we generate some insights from the conversation. So this is a conversation starter. I really like that. I know that I had a big argument about scaling stuff when we were at the Tamarack Institute. I thought we were scaling too fast. Right. I don't really know if we have a there. And I know everyone wants us to scale, but I think we're kind of light on some things. And it was a terrific debate, which I lost. But it was very good. It was very good to get there. And we kind of knew we were being a little bit iffy on something. In fact, I'll give you the note. How many of you know about the collective impact approach to things, FSG, Foundation Strategies Group? Some of you know about it. It was really big in the social field. They launched a paper that was better than the work we were doing, and everyone went nuts over this approach. It was, for us, it was kind of like this. Oh, well, I guess we're scaling. Because everyone went nuts about this thing, and we were roughly doing the same thing. So it was beyond our control anyways. So we just went ahead and did it. Sorry, go ahead, Deborah. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you. I was just reading Casey's comment, and I feel like yeah, we're, I think some of I guess I'm kind of answering the question, Chris, that you posed. Is like, I think I feel like chronic disaster is the trap that I can map a lot of things that like I'm aware of from our institutional history. But I
Yeah.
think the ethos of Future Generations began as this grand adventure, and the growth and maturity phase is when you kind of you've discovered what's on the vista. But so much of the energy of a lot of the people who have huge influence on the culture, and as Joey pointed out, a lot of us come in because we want to be stimulated, we want to have problems to solve, and we're not content with clocking in, clocking out, so I think in some ways there's almost this interesting culture of explorer adventurer
Yes.
that is preventing us from feeling good about like committing to something longer term, and then seeing what it looks like in a growth and maturity stage. That's my observation.
Great insight. Thank you. This is good. So this lens is already generating a little bit of insights. I think we were just doing this in real time. So maybe what we'll do is let's just leave this second question for the end of the session today, because we've got two other ideas. We want to talk a little bit about what we might have learned through this lens that might be useful for our strategy work. But it did generate some insights. Everyone, for the purpose of time, do you mind if I go to the next idea, which is not as remotely as complex as this one? This one is about tensions. And I don't know if this is about growth per se. There are specific tensions that come from growth. This is taking something that we all know about, which is that any effort to deal with an organization or address a complex thing is full of paradoxes, tensions, and dilemmas, right? And these tensions can and should be addressed as opportunities to develop creative responses. And there's this metaphor that I want to share with you quickly about the job of a stewardship group like yours is to treat this as a pressure cooker of change that can be quite productive. And I want to make a case for that. So what we want to do is sensitize and normalize the idea of tension. So, hey, the Aspen Institute, pretty big piece of work. We did some stuff with them a long time ago, and I've loved them ever since. And I found this resource, which is no longer on the website. I don't know why, about their work in community development around complex community change. And so the workshop itself begins with a couple of statements that refer to the challenges this group was having in getting to the next level of performance in their community-wide efforts to improve outcomes for kids and families. And they said there are five key challenges that must be recognized and managed to make community change. And I don't want you to get hung up on these challenges, everyone. There's lots of kind of challenges everywhere, but the manner in which the Aspen Institute framed these, I think, is quite instructive for us. So they have the first one, the product process challenge. Jane, just to change voice, do you mind reading this first one out, all three bullet points here?
On the one hand, we know that success of our efforts will depend on the sustained inclusion, participation, and investment of a broad section of stakeholders. On the other hand, we know that people will get frustrated by excessive talk, meetings, committees, planning, and will drop out if they don't see action, product, or outcomes. Creative challenge is how do we gain and keep maximum stakeholder engagement and commitment while efficiently moving to outcomes.
Feel that one, folks? That seems right. You could maybe play with the language a little bit, but we know those are tensions, right? And we know that it's a false trade-off to expect one and not deal with the other. So the issue is name them, frame them, and use them. The stewardship challenge is the third one, or a better framing that you could come up with. I'm going to ask Shannon if you don't mind doing the next one, just to do participation. This is a classic tension, Shannon, if you don't mind reading it for the group.
On the other hand,
Starting with on the one hand, I guess.
Yeah, on the one hand, on the left there.
okay.
Yeah.
On the
Oh,
one
sorry,
hand-
I'll go back. Yeah.
On the one hand, we know that stakeholders in our communities, schools, and businesses sectors must lead and own the bottom-up change. On the other hand, we know that the systemic nature of these problems means that we need stimulus, political support, technical assistance, and the other resources from other sectors, from the region, from the states, and from national entities. Creative challenge. How can we strategically include people, institutions, and other resources that are beyond the schools, local employers, community organizations, etc., to help move us towards the goal without losing local ownership, knowledge, and commitment? How do we align insiders and outsiders for maximum impact?
Super. Thank you, Shannon. Sorry for the typo there. That one also makes sense, right? You could frame it a little bit better, but we know there's some version of this tension. So name it, frame it, and use it. I'm going to go to Casey. Casey, if you don't mind doing this third one.
Sure. The long-term, short-term tension. On the
Oops,
other,
I made a big boo-boo there. On the one hand.
on the one hand, we recognize that the problems of poverty, poor education, low or lousy employment, and race have deep roots, and it will take a long time for our efforts to make significant progress on them. On the other hand, we want to see some change as soon as possible, both because each life is precious and because we want to demonstrate to the community that change is possible. Creative challenge. How do we simultaneously tackle the entrenched structural and institutional problems in our education and employment systems while also achieving some early wins?
Thank you, Casey.
You're welcome.
And again, you might frame this slightly differently, but that is a classic challenge in any organization. And a group I did this with last time said it's not just early wins, but how do you get changes so that changes that are good enough that the change process is self-refueling, where it begins to feed on itself in a positive way. So these are three challenges, and there's techniques for dealing with them, everyone. Wicked questions, polarity management, integrated thinking, emergent learning framework. So the idea of naming it and framing it is there, but using it can be done with different methods and techniques. And the idea here is that when you're dealing with tensions and complex issues in general, it does sort of require adaptive leadership and management, which we referred to the last time. I heard some of you refer to it. And I'll just take this quote from Heifetz 2005 and Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's a beautiful metaphor. The job of adaptive leadership is not to eliminate the stress that comes with these tensions, which reduces the impetus for coming up with a solution, but in fact to harness it, keeping at levels that motivates change without overwhelming people. The metaphor being an atmosphere of a productive distress as a pressure cooker, where you, the cooks, regulate the pressure by turning the heat up or down, while the relief valve lets off steam to keep the pressure within a safe limit. If you have too much tension on these things, like too much product or too much process, too much inside, too much outside, the vessel can blow. On the other hand, if you don't acknowledge that these tensions exist and try and use them creatively, nothing's going to cook. We won't make change at the pace or scale or the depth that we like. So I think one of the things that we could do eventually is talk about the tensions that you will likely experience in your next 5-year strategy. But I'd like to stop here for a second and just see how you react to this general idea of tensions, naming them, framing them, and using it. I'll go here. This is very quick, but I know that some of you may be quite adept at something called polarity management. Maybe a quick straw poll. Who's heard of polarity management? Jane, you haven't heard about it? Oh, you have. Okay, I see what you're doing. Any of these? Has anyone seen any of these before? They're not actually quite difficult, anyone. They're just sort of giving a fancy name to a way of managing something. Wicked questions, polarity management, integrated thinking, emergent learning. Okay, who thinks you could come up with your own versions of these things? And maybe let's see if we can come up with the tension that you might experience in the work. I know if you're doing community development work in the way that you're doing it, community building, there are endless tensions. Jenny's got a thumbs up. That may not be a hands up, Jenny, but it might be.
It could be. I mean, I think about all the time in communities in Appalachia in particular, it's the tension between young new ideas and what's always worked before is a major one that we all deal with. And so it's how do you give credence to the history that has come before and has done all this hard work while moving forward with, new fresh thoughts.
That's a great one. So how would you name them? Would you say the the old versus new tension?
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to put it, or the
Yeah.
history versus future tension, possibly.
Oh, better.
That way
better.
nobody feels offended.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you. That's a good one. I'm gonna fix another boo-boo here. Other tensions that you might feel in the university or even in the region. I've never heard future versus past tension before. That's excellent.
Well, similar, I think, interloper versus native or indigenous. might be a
Yes.
tension.
Is that a version of this, Deborah? I'm not saying it has to be the same, but is there, you said, what did you say, interloper versus local, indigenous?
Yeah, inside to outside, like I'm seeing that in the lens of seed scale, which is, members within a community, but who occupy different spaces of like either influence, resourcing, or energy within that system. But for our institution, I think even in our home community, the idea of like kind of outsider versus insider
Yeah,
is a tension that we hold.
yeah. Yeah, probably quite universal, really, but maybe more amplified in some contexts than the other. I live in a province in Western Canada that has that dynamic strong. If you're not from Alberta, you don't know Alberta, so we're not listening to you. Yeah, excellent. Other kind of tensions that you might see in your work or even in the university?
Well, one is this maybe, I guess it's different from the one Jenny voiced, but I think especially now with US aid crumbling and this sort of thing, the age old kind of donor driven priorities versus those that are maybe coming from the community. And so we see that they're all different levels depending on who the donor is, right? A good donor is great to work with, but I'll just use the historic tension, say in Afghanistan, where there's very real extremes. The tension of, the Western driven donor mandates coming in through the World Bank or the UN versus very real religious tensions or local tensions coming out of the Taliban and their religious or cultural. Obviously, there are less extreme versions. I think Deborah and others have indicated whether it's in Appalachia or Haiti or wherever. But yeah, I mean, that old, especially like in Nepal or in Afghanistan or Haiti, where there have been these big biopower forces. I think you have that, right? The donor priorities versus the community or nonprofit priorities.
Well, not only is that classic, it just also reminds us that the dynamic of tension changes over time. I hadn't thought of that, Luke. I used to do international stuff and I worked quite a bit with USAID in Eastern Europe and a bunch of others. But yeah, the last 8 weeks changed the dynamic of that relationship.
Well, exactly. It's been
Yeah.
something we had to live with, and now everything was up for question. But I just even before the 8 weeks, I go back to how many times I've spent, I oversaw a team of people cutting from the American People cover page out of textbooks before they went to the field, right? Like aid said it's got to be from the American people, and we said that will get children killed. So our tension was get the books and then cut them out and never tell them we cut that page out, right?
Wow.
Not really okay, but talk about resolving a tension where you take books to the communities and they literally say, in this current form, we will die if we put these out, so big
Wow.
extremes.
Wow. Such a granular, meaningful case study. Well, everyone, let's say this, that we don't have time to litigate this too much more because we spent some more time on adaptive cycle, but I do want you to leave with this provocation that it is good to name them, to frame them, and to saying, let's use them and get creative about them. So tensions aren't something to hide away from and to put the temperature down on. If we can talk about them and create this pressure cooker, saying, let's do it in a way that creates this pressure to come up with creative solutions, not false trade-offs when we can. So they're not an aberration, they're endemic tensions. Let's use them. Okay, I'm going to go to the last one. And Jane, just as we go to Three Horizons, I'm going to ask you to set it up again a little bit because I think you touched on it a little bit with some staff. So can you provide a little bit of color and texture and context for why we're going to look at this as the last idea?
Sure. Yeah, and this is one that I really love, and that it's one of my lenses constantly in a way. And partly because and I think I talked with Shannon and Deborah about this. We used it in some work we were doing together last week or earlier this week. No, last week, it's Monday. But in First Horizon, it's kind of it's got some similarities to Brick-Counterloop, but not exactly. But in First Horizon, it's kind of the world as it is, and it's sort of what we would call sustaining innovation, is the innovation descriptor of it. So we keep going when we might make things a little bit better, but it's really about extending what we have in the present. And it's also something that very often communities can get trapped in just because it's not that they don't have the disruptive and transformative innovation capabilities, but it's that there's so much that constrains them and holds them back. And of course, one of our jobs is actually to remove those barriers and to open up space for enabling communities to do that. Because then Third Horizon is when we are moving towards viable futures. So this is looking longer term. It's looking at what might be considered transformative innovation, where we are challenging the very fundamentals of the systems we inhabit. So it's learning, some of you know about the Freeland work I do. So it's learning even to train ourselves to see beyond the property gaze, for example, not being constrained by the government systems as we know them, by the financial systems as we know them. So it actually gives us an opportunity to think about the worlds that actually, in some cases, are emerging already in places, but how do they become possible? And then this middle space is Horizon 2, which we alluded to before, which is this space of transition. And it's a space of disruptive innovation. And I don't know if we'll have time for it today, but Horizon 2 can get very nuanced because, as you can see by the blue curve in the middle, what happens with Horizon 2 is that as you're creating and implementing kinds of disruptive innovation, it can then go two ways. So it can sort of get captured. And then this is kind of a nuanced, I think it's called H2 minus 1 or something. It can get captured. So one example of that would be like Uber. The Uber service, which when it first came out, it seemed like, oh, this is going to be this really interesting disruptive innovation, which is going to, a thought initially was that this is going to dramatically reduce car use in cities. And what happened was actually it did the opposite. It actually massively multiplied car trips in cities and so on. So it became sort of captured. Or what happens is this can transform into Horizon 3 of transformative innovation when you move through disruption. So that might have been an overly complex way to describe it, but I guess a point that I want to make as I think about our work is I feel like the work we do is very much practice and action oriented in Horizon 1 and making things tangible as quickly as we can, while we also hold within us these aspirations towards Horizon 3 futures, which are quite different worlds than what we're constrained by now. And that it's very hard to make the bridge between Horizon 1 and Horizon 3. And that we can do more in Horizon 2, but how do we do that? And how can we be more of a bridging organization so that our action, research, and learning are in Horizon 1, 2, and 3? And what does that look like? So that's what I'll start with.
Well, and you really summarized the essence of it, everyone. And I'm just going to do a couple of additional slides with this because some of you have seen it. So this is a fairly, well, by the way, the formatting changed as I put it on here. Everything you're about to see is from H3 University. So I may well be in copyright jail in about 20 minutes after showing you this, but please go to that website. It's very, very good. And you named it. I'm going to just provide a little bit more texture. It's the business as usual approach. And the big idea, I think, of the whole Three Horizons approach, Jane, is that one can create a portfolio of priorities and actions moving forward that have a mix of activities across horizons and intent. So the process is asking yourself certain questions about different horizons. What are we doing? How are we getting things done today? And how can we improve on what we have already? That's Horizon 1. Horizon 3, to jump like you did, Jane, is what are the pockets of things happening right now that we might want to bet on, just saying the signals are weak and we don't know for sure if it's a sure thing, but here are the signals about what is emerging and arising, or even what we can start creating as a coherent possible vision. And you can bet some time and energy and money on that. The second horizon is the bridger between the two. Some of them are meant to extend the life of the Horizon 1 stuff, the business as usual, and some of them are meant to prepare for Horizon 3 kind of opportunities. So I know that I do with some clean energy stuff in Alberta. There's a numbers of regulations going on right now to expand the possibility that people can sell back self-generated power to the grid. We don't know precisely what that is in Horizon 3, but we know if we don't get the grid made more flexible and accessible for microgeneration, it's always going to be monopolized. So the bid is create a Horizon 2 kind of policy, and from that Horizon 3 responses can kind of emerge. So that's the thinking of it. So there are some additional things to think about here. If one looks at the three horizons in a kind of a negative way, Horizon 1 kind of looks, irrelevant and too risky to bet on. Sorry, it's a Horizon 1 is a sort of a dinosaur. A Horizon 3 perspective will look at Horizon 1 and going, hey, that's a dinosaur. What are you doing with that for? That's the negative version. And Horizon 2 stuff that's a compromise. Why don't you bet big right now on clean energy manifestation? And a Horizon 2 person would say, well, that's impractical. You can't bid big on microgeneration because we can't sell back to the grid yet. So why would you even generate that? So you can see how if you have a negative and a kind of sclerotic understanding of those horizons, you can easily critique the others. But if you have a more positive orientation, you can see the value in all those different horizons. So that's number 2. I'm going to show you one more. There is a practical dimension to this, which is 3 horizon mapping and planning, which is kind of like earlier Deborah, I can see your screen right now, when we were mapping the eco cycle, playing that little game. You can do that kind of as here as well. And you go through these different little steps. You have discussions about Horizon 1, 2, and 3, and you map it all out. And then you have good discussions about what are the things that you might want to bet on in a balanced portfolio of 3 different horizons. And it's just an easy way to discuss practical things that may end up generating patterns of new priorities for the organization if you go through it through a 3 horizons lens. So I'm just going to stop there. That was a very fast review, but we had to do quickly because of the timeline. But let's get your feedback on this framework as well. Jane, you confirmed that you love it quite a bit as well. I know it's an extraordinarily popular framework in social innovation and systems change in general, never mind business private sector enterprises. Who else has seen this before? Maybe we'll start that way, and you may have experienced it differently. Who's seeing this framework for the first time, at least in the last 8 weeks?
I feel like I've seen similar. I don't want to say
Yeah.
it's the same, but definitely when I was in grad school looking at social enterprise and entrepreneurship modeling, Clayton Christian's work, I think we looked at a bunch of similar stuff.
That's true. Look, it'd be stuff like those adjacent, like innovation areas, adjacent
Yeah.
innovation, things like that. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't drawn that connection. Yep. Thanks, Luke. Others seeing the three horizons? No?
I think
Okay.
also, I think you almost have to work with it for it to become meaningful, you know?
Right.
Which is why the mapping, yeah, we can decide what all aspects of mapping we'll get into when we have in-person time together. But
I was
yeah.
gonna say
I think
I
that
haven't.
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry,
Chris.
Mark.
Go, Chris.
I haven't seen it before, but it seems like Horizon 2, like you have Horizon 1, which is sort of business, as it says here, business as usual, and you might have an idea of where you want to be in the future, Horizon 3. And so it seems like Horizon 2 is almost made up to get you there.
As a bridge.
To sort of you make up the bridge.
Yeah.
Um Sort of a secondary
Yep.
strategy or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. In fact, go ahead, Jane.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that's I think that's partly true, especially for the things that come out of an aspiration for for moving towards Horizon 3. And that's the thing. And very often I think creators in Horizon who are doing something in Horizon 2 and then it gets captured don't aren't necessarily intending or even aware. I mean, you could think of, lots of businesses that are like this. I mentioned Uber, but there are many others that, seem like they were created for one purpose, but then they sort of got captured and they become the status quo. So that's where sort of the blue meets the red, and then they become the status quo, and they're really not improving things the way maybe they were originally intended to even. So that's the trick. Like, how do you keep going with what you're creating in Horizon 2 so that actually it becomes a Horizon 3? Because there are, what I would say is that almost every person and organization actually experiences all three horizons. So we're all capable of living in all three. We might have a penchant for one more than the other. But I think in many cases, the bridging of Horizon 2 is really one of the most difficult things, and especially bridging that gets over the hump to move into Horizon 3. Because provocations can, as Mark knows, the organization that I used to work for we're really strong in Horizon 3. We can provoke extraordinarily what different futures can look like, what systemic innovation can look like. But actually moving things there at scale is a whole different dimension. And so that's why I think what Future Generations does is so interesting, because I think we are very much, we work in First Horizon, we work on stuff right now, we dream big, we have very strong ambitions, and we're trying in the Horizon 2, and I think that we can do actually a whole lot more to bridge those. So for me, that really excites me, because I see such potential there for us to actually realize the kinds of futures that we're starting to build and that we're aspiring to, but then actually building that bridge, which not many people do well. It's really, really hard to do well.
Yeah. Jay, in some ways, that's what the Three Horizons package does more than others. It is meant to be guiding in a series of conversations. Other frameworks are just there to describe different kinds of possibilities, but the Three Horizons framework begs you to have these kind of conversations that have to be generative for you to have some debates and working conclusions about what's the highest and best use of your time going forward. A lot of other frameworks don't do that.
Yeah, and I think it could be, you know, useful for our students too, as they think. I know for me, I used it a lot when I did community work too, because it's really, really helpful in that regard too. So, yeah.
Good. Well, let me just ask this: do you think this is a useful technique that we should bring into the more tangible strategy discussions moving forward? This framework, or do you have any concerns about doing that? There's a whole set of techniques, so it's not as if we have to invent anything. It's made for these strategy chats, but kind of wanting to test your appetite for it. Deborah, you're nodding. I can see that. Okay.
I do not want to be overly swaying people. If this doesn't
Really?
resonate, please feel free to say so.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll go ahead, Jane. Thank you for
Yep.
the encouragement. It's not working for me. I will try my best to work in this framework and get it, but I don't think it's helping me be very imaginative. And I don't know why. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is interesting. I guess before I could answer that question, I would need a better, and we probably don't have time. But and this is the case with many of these very interesting things we've looked at, is to try to think where exactly it would fit into the process, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
with just this one slide here of figuring out, because I don't want to deny. It's a little different from Joey that's not working. I guess I would say trying to think about, I do feel like we do a lot of this inherently. I mean, many people have heard me at Future Generations say, hey, sometimes we're so innovative, we innovate right back out of our own innovations. And so I think that is going back to some of our discussion from a couple of weeks ago. I have never once thought we lacked innovation, right? So I think it is trying to reconcile, how do you kind of, I think last time I used the word ground, land the airplane, right? As the hardest part of flight is taking the innovative ideas and landing them in a concrete way, like turning them into that, making them viable, kind of as Chris said, doing the bridge and then actually keeping the uplift, right? So that is very much a challenge. But yeah, to kind of echo Joey, I'm struggling a bit with how this will layer onto many of our existing processes. I don't think it would detract, but I'm not sure that it would kind of create the aha moment.
Yep. Good.
Well, and I'll just quickly jump in. I found it so exciting to use as a framework to think about how we talk to donors or funders or partners, and showing them like what would happen if we follow the status quo, or if if we take a few steps in the direction we know we're going, what would happen if they wanted to fund something that would kind of bridge us to something more inspirational, or what would it take to get us to that kind of dream third horizon. And I think because I also see this as it makes sense to me with my background in visual art, because it feels like draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, or like you start with the concrete and you have to get that down so you can kind of see it or experience it, feel it. And that gives you the ability then to see what's possible. And then how do you get from that to there? So it's like, it's very, very much embodying. It doesn't feel like, it feels like they're all intermixed. So to me, it feels very process laden, but it also gives both something very visually appealing that I think people can it tune into, and to frame how we want to talk about moving things forward.
Yep. Yep. You're pointing out like there's a marketing use to this, a comms marketing use. So it might well be, I'm just using this as an example. It might be the efficacy for internal analysis, etc., might be one thing, but you might be, well, but the marketing dimensions of this are quite big because it might make more accessible and coherent some of, categorizing some of the kinds of things you're doing. I think that's great, Deborah. Thank you. Other reactions, and knowing that just this conversation is revealing that we don't need to use all these frameworks. We're just trying to say what is useful when, and we might want to be more foreground with some of the frameworks and background with the others. So we're really trying to stress test which stuff appeals to you and warrants further use later on. Any other reactions?
I'll jump in. I have looked at this just recently for the first time with Deborah and Jane, and agree with what Deborah said, how I can see it visually as a really helpful tool for an external audience. I struggle a little bit trying to wrap my head around using it for this overarching strategy spanning 5 years and considering all of the history. I think just because when I think about, the next 5 years, it's so broad, and this feels like a very almost oversimplified, 3-step graphic. But I think to Jane's point, I think it would make much more sense and be easier to fill in all of those, answer all of those questions in the 3 horizons once you're in it,
Right. I mean, once you're actually interacting with
putting pen to paper and trying to map it out.
Yep.
Yeah, but on just, the graphic of it, it's like, how can we put it all in there?
Yeah, it's good. Thank you, Shannon. Let's do 1 or 2 more. This is it's important for us to get a sense of how you feel about this. Okay, Dave. Okay, well, maybe we're good then. Thank you. Well, that's 4 or 5 comments on the 3 horizons. Let's maybe just wrap with a quick summary of what we chatted about and see if you have any last reflections. And this will be the end of our second session where we're exploring ideas that might be useful. Maybe that's the title we should have called it, Jane. Ideas that might be useful. But we need to check with you. Oh, this is idea 4, 5, and 6. Yeah. So these are the 3 ideas: the adaptive cycle, tensions in the pressure cooker, and 3 horizons. We're saying the support for the 3 horizons is sort of qualified, Jane, I'm hearing, as an idea. We have some rationale for both. Wondering if you don't mind if we go to the top one, everyone, number 4. Is number 4 the idea of using this as a way of exploring some ideas, life cycle and eco cycle? Is that something you would like to see again, the adaptive cycle? Or who would like to see it again? Thank you, Deborah. Jane, why don't we try the hand function? That way you don't have to go on screen. But so Joey, you felt okay with it. Chris, you felt okay. Deborah, thank you. Shannon's got.
Just to clarify, we're talking about idea 4, the adaptive cycle.
Yeah, number 4, the adaptive cycle.
Just perfect.
Thank you for clarifying. So number 4, general support for seeing number 4 again in some format. We'll figure out how. Okay. Let me shape number 5. I would like to propose, this is me doing something I didn't think I was going to do, that as we do the strategy, that what we do is create a little pressure cooker board or tension board, that when stuff comes up, we don't have to resolve it, but we could say, there's the tension. And we just sort of accumulate it and start saying, here's all the tensions we might be feeling. And we can come back to that and think about how to resolve and manage some of those tensions. But if they pop up, let's not slow down because of them. Let's see them. And then we can name them, frame them, and use them later. So that would be my proposal. Let's have a pressure cooker scoreboard going on. Let's just see how you feel about that with hands up, if you like it. Okay, mostly hands. If I could do hands, I would. Okay, but not everybody. Okay. Well, I'm getting, Jane, of these, a sense that adaptive cycle, possibly, yes, good. The tensions, a lot of, not everyone thinking that that might be useful. And we have this sort of nuanced understanding of how number 3 may or may not work, with the understanding that it might feel different if we actually roll up our sleeves and get into the framework, but that's still not guaranteed. I'd like to say that we've got mission accomplished on doing that. Maybe what we could do is just do one last checkout as we go around the room and see if you have any last reflections on what we just talked about, knowing that the next step for Jane, I, and some others is to take a look at some of the things that were said over the last 2 sessions and then come back to you in a couple of weeks. Or what was the date we were coming back, Jane? It's pretty soon.
April 14th.
April 14th, with a proposal about the new art going forward, including some of the methods and techniques we might use in the process in advance of May 5th and 6th, and actually May 5th and 6th. So we're coming back to you with that. Jane, did you want to add anything before we checked out?
Yeah, I guess I was just no, actually no, I don't want to. I wanna listen and reflect further.
Yeah. Well, everyone, we said we were going to do 3 ideas today rather than 1. So we did rock and roll a little bit in a sort of an appetizer type format. Why don't we just go around quickly just to allow you to check out what's alive for you as we leave these 3 ideas and think about the strategy work that is coming up very quickly. And if you don't mind, Chris, I'm just gonna, you're my first on my screen. Chris, do you mind just starting us off? Just what's alive for you as we exit today's meeting?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that 3 horizons, and I don't have any concrete examples in my head, but I think I like it. You know, when you're thinking, you know, I want to get from here to there. Like I have an idea of where I want to be, but I don't have the technology or the know-how to get there yet. But I know there's this other thing that I'm gonna have to do in the meantime. It's better than what I'm doing right now, but I know it's not going to be as good as where I want to be, but it's still a better option than what I'm doing.
Yep.
Even though I know I'm going to reject it shortly. I kind of I can appreciate that idea. I don't have like I said, I don't have an example in my head, but
Yeah.
I can appreciate the strategy there. That's sort of what I'm thinking at the moment.
Good. You're also, by the way, based on your reflection, I'm also thinking of the idea of eventually pathways. If we agree where we want to go, what are the pathways required in order to get there? Yeah. Thank you, Chris. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go from right to left on my screen as I see it. I have Casey and then Jenny.
Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of think of these models and cycles and sort of relate them to other ones that I have came across recently, whether it's the kind of rising aspirations of seed scale, and then like the 4 directions of indigenous research agenda,
Oh, yes.
and kind of seeing how they mold together and where there could be kind of like you're maybe working in one horizon and trying to look at different indicators of how you could jump into another horizon and vice versa. So a little bit scrambled, but trying to relate it to other models.
Super. Well, you're reminded there's lots of different frameworks to do stuff. At the end of the day, we will have to make choices about foreground and background frameworks because they're not meant to be easily reconcilable. It might be more like acetates. Remember, it used to be acetates. You put one on top of the other and does it make something more sensible? But Casey, thanks for absorbing it and enjoy the spinning for a little bit. Yeah. I have, oh boy, Deborah and then Jenny and then Joey. Oh, did I go the right order? Sorry, the order moved on me again. Can we go Deborah, Jenny, and then Joey?
Yes. what's alive for me is arrows. I'm just seeing a lot of arrows and directions with these
That's
different
right.
models.
That's right, Jenny.
So it just, I'm just gonna think about some of the symbolic representations from that.
Deborah, very good point. I just realized we're plumb full of arrows. You're right. Thank you. Yeah. Next.
Yeah, I think some of it is finally like this thought that you can name the tension so you're not ignoring it, but you don't have to solve it, right? I often joke that the strongest ideas and projects come out of the in between of two people that don't totally agree, but once you get to the in between, you end up with this amazing proposal or project or whatnot. And I sort of want to explore how that works, like with community level tensions too, because that's when magic happens, is when you can get everybody looking in the same direction, but not necessarily from the same background or the same like, thought process even.
Awesome. Jenny, from an experienced community developer, you can tell. Thank you. Yeah. Why don't we go Joey, uh, Shannon, and then Luke.
Yeah, so well, something that I think Deborah had said a few minutes ago about the three horizons is really sticking with me about how effective of a framework it is for communicating the work that we're doing. And so this is something I'll be thinking about and sitting on for a while. That there's just to name and map one of those tensions. There's frameworks that help us do the strategic planning. There's frameworks that help us talk about the strategic planning, and there's frameworks that help us actually do the work of the university after we've come up with some sort of a plan. And then there's frameworks that
Mhm.
help us communicate doing that work, right? The work that's happening.
Yep.
And those are four different categories of frameworks that I think I will be juggling in my own head for a while.
Thanks for offering those. That's a good way of maybe assembling all the conversations we want to have as well. Saying for these kind of conversations, here's might be some helpful frameworks, but we don't have to have all those conversations and frameworks at the same time. It'll be nauseous, nausea-inducing. So, Joey, awesome. Thank you. Luke, then I have,
Do you want me to go?
or sorry, Shannon. Sorry, Shannon. I went through my list. Shannon, yes.
We keep
Shannon and Luke.
jumping around on the screen.
Yeah, my apologies.
Looking at these three frameworks on one slide makes it easier for me to kind of compartmentalize at least how I would imagine us using them. And the three horizons doesn't seem like as intense when you put the adaptive cycle ahead of it. I mean, for strategic thinking, the adaptive cycle feels very useful to me because I'm the type of person that wants to like reflect on, we'll see the release without, some chaos or tension. And then the pressure cooker, I feel like is a good tool in the strategy process. And then I feel like the three horizons would kind of come in after, the adaptive cycle is like fully thought through. The exploration turns into action items. And when you have all of that broad thinking done, I can see how it would be easier to map it more broadly on the three horizons. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. The sequence matters, you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, I'll just build off of both Shannon and Joey, but I think Joey, some of what Joey said resonated with me. I've raised my hand for the adaptive cycle. It's not that it's not nothing against the other two, but that
Yeah,
one clicks for me
yeah,
in a very different way, both in terms of existing, how I've always approached strategic planning and thinking. It's very kind of conducive with seed scale and some of our current methods. Some of the others, I think, like idea 5 seems to me to almost be more useful in a management context, right? Like as we're now thinking about taking this plan, or it's very interesting to me to hear Deborah talking about how useful the horizons is, because yeah, if you're trying to, you know, meet someone where they're at from a comm standpoint, you need to be big, you need, you know, big swaths of thinking. So I think to some degree, when we got to the raise hands for the other two ideas, I guess I almost didn't feel like I knew enough to raise my hand, right? Like, okay, what are we going to use this for? Whereas the other one, coming at it from a strategy standpoint, you know, that one really resonates.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good checkout so far, because we're really confirming different frameworks for different things, which is hyper useful. Thank you. I think I got everyone, but
Stephanie,
again, Stephanie. Oh, right, Stephanie. My apologies, Stephanie, and then Jane.
Oh, that's okay, because I'm the person who likes to sit back and think about things for a while. It takes me a little processing time. For me, the adaptive cycle, you know, that makes, you know, instant sense for me. The rest of it, I got to ponder and think about.
Thank you, Stephanie. Jane, to close.
yeah, sincerely appreciate just all of these reflections. And I find myself, just because I've used all of these in so many ways, I'm trying not to get stuck in how I've used them, and trying to also see them afresh. And it's really helpful and interesting to hear all of your perspectives. And I also think that it is very useful to distinguish when we're talking about the evolution of our organization as strategy, and the evolution of what we're doing in the world as strategy. And my tendency is to use adaptive cycle for organizational evolution, for us to use the tensions actually for both, but to distinguish when are we, because we have a lot of tensions in the organization, but that's a good thing. If we didn't, that to me would be a real problem. Tensions are good. That's how we grow. Dealing with them is how we grow. And I think tensions in the organization and in the work we do in the world is good. And then with Three Horizons, I tend to use it actually more externally for the work we do in the world. So to me, there's a big difference there between sort of internal. So, but those are just, that's not right or wrong. These are just, again, lenses, and always important that these lenses are evolving and not fixed. It's not holding on to one framework or set of approaches and saying that's what we do, period. We're always going to do that, but actually learning to see it different ways is what I feel is really important. Should I just say a couple next steps, Mark?
Sure. Yeah, you can. I mentioned the broad arc about getting ready for the 14th, but please. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to name that I'm gonna create a Slack channel tonight for strategy process, which I'll actually make open to everyone in who's on our Slack channel, including to share these meetings. So in case anybody who's not here wants to listen to it, we'll also share the decks and so on, so that it's transparent and people can engage. A smaller number of us, so I'll tap the shoulders of a couple of people to meet Mark and I to debrief, and I think, as I said at the beginning, will be, as we go through this process over the coming weeks and months, we'll also be engaging others in various ways to get input, feedback, and challenge our ideas and thinking, and help us shape the strategic priorities moving forward. That's it. Anything else, Mark?
No, I think that's good. Thanks everyone. This was a lot of stuff to absorb, but we thought we should go slow to go fast and just play around with some of these things to get to know each other, warm up a little bit, see what resonate with you. So I don't think the burden is anything except just to do that. Chat, play with some ideas, and just see where the sentiment lands. So now as we get into the next steps, it'll be a little bit more roll up your sleeves, hands-on practical, but I appreciate your willingness and Jane's curation to spend a little bit of time doing this. This was 4 hours over 2 weeks that I hope you think was a good use of your time.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wishing you all a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you, Mark, very much.
Take care. We'll talk soon. Nice to meet you, Casey.
Thanks. Good to see y'all.
Thanks, Luke. Bye-bye.
Same to you. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.